This was a great one, folks. We were really looking forward to covering this. Yesterday, the Convo couch became the hot seat. They should have renamed their show to Hot Seat for yesterday's episode because Cornel West sat down for an hour-long interview with our friend Pasta Jardula, and we're going to play a few clips from the interview and then react to them. I really encourage you guys to watch the full thing. It was really, really well done. We're going to touch on 3 specific sections here. I'll just tell you in advance what those 3 are. It was hard to choose which ones to do. We could have just sat and played the whole thing and covered the whole thing, but we can't keep you guys here till 2 a.m, so we're not going to do that. But I'm sure also we'll talk to Pasta about this more when he's on in about a week and a half. But the 3 sections we're going to cover are the section where Pasta asked Cornel about the use of the term neo-fascism to describe Trump and some of Trump's supporters, the confrontation over Dr. Fauci, and then the teaching of sexuality in schools at the very, very end. We think that's sort of a broad sampling. And so let's get to it right now. This is slightly sped up since there's a decent amount here. Overall, a little under 7 minutes of video. But here's Cornel West on the Convo couch with Craig Pasta Jardula. Here we go.
The real part where people have a problem with is that you call Brother Biden a neoliberal disaster when if you just put it on paper right now, and I'll tell you this right now, I think that sometimes people look at this and they're like, well, Dr. West is calling him a neoliberal disaster and calls Trump a neo-fascist when the corporate entities are way more invested in President Biden than they are Donald Trump, that he's kind of carrying a little water for Biden, and he's making that excuse that it was okay to vote for Biden over Donald Trump, which I think, was completely wrong. If you told me today, and I'm never going to vote for Biden, I'm never going to vote for Donald Trump, but if you put a gun to my head, Dr. West, and said I had to vote for either one of the two, I'm voting for Donald Trump. We're on the brink of World War III here now.
Okay, I'm going to stop it for a second. I think it was really good that he made that point. I think it was really good that he just put that out there. Because, and this is a theme that we're going to touch on throughout this segment. Cornel West is a left-wing academic. Cornel West does not encounter many people in his circles who say what Pasta just said, which is, I'm not going to vote for either one, but gun to my head, I would vote for Donald Trump on the issue of Russia-Ukraine, which is really the issue of World War III all by itself. I think was really good of him to put his cards on the table there. And to Cornel's credit, notice how he nods along and says, yep, I get it. If you said that to someone running as a Democrat, they would shut you down immediately. They might even leave the interview. They might not even finish, right? But at the very least, they would bark over you if you said that.
I will say it was very interesting watching Pasta. I haven't seen a lot of his stuff.
Russell's more of a side salad guy, but he appreciates.
I'm staying off the carbs. I'm telling you, I put on weight over the winter. I had to stop working out for a while. That he don't give a fuck, man. And I'm not saying he doesn't have some limitations, I guess, on his YouTube when he's doing his YouTube channel. But this was on Rockfin. This is a real activist perspective he brought to it, and he left the diplomacy at home. He just, not that he was nasty or mean or
no, he was the opposite. I thought it was very, very professionally done,
especially because at the beginning you could see he expressed admiration for Cornel West that you could tell was sincere, and so that right there put everything in a context that he does admire this man. But hey, man, he's out there doing the work for real. He has these really strong convictions. And I think a lot of people in this space would not have asked him some of this, not this way, not that directly. And as you point out, not with that framing to straight out be like, oh, yeah, well, if you held a gun to my head, I would vote for Trump. Because let's face it, I would say most of us in our section of this space would probably say the same thing, but we don't say it all that much.
Right, of course.
Right? He just can't, boom. because
Right.
you know you're gonna get shit for even occupying the lane that we occupy. You got the people. You say something like that, they shit themselves. Right.
Right, exactly.
Which always makes you feel if you do if you have the kind of act we have, you just want to say to them, and we call it the aristocrats.
Yeah,
like
right.
what did you think you were watching? Was that not clear? But he just went there, man, with Cornel West. I don't think a lot of people would do that. So hats off to him, man. This was a ballsy interview.
Yeah, it was very well done.
You see the hypocrisy there, and can you maybe square that circle right there and kind of give us a little insight to this whole, like, Biden gets this treatment, but Trump gets that treatment?
Yeah, I mean, one is that we could have been on the brink of World War III with Trump too. Anybody who's head of a militaristic and aggressive.
Okay, but the thing is, we weren't on the brink of World War III with Trump. I mean, yeah, you could be on the brink of World War III with anybody in theory.
That's theoretical.
I could look like an elephant if I had big ears and a trunk. You know what I mean? And look, Trump gave us a couple of scares, right? With the Soleimani assassination and the, dick waving contest with Kim Jong-un with my button is bigger than yours. I'm not saying he didn't give us a couple scares, but it's pretty clear that Trump, and like I've made this point in the past, I think part of being, an outer borough New York real estate guy is knowing how far you can push the guy on the other side without blowing the deal, right? Knowing how far you can take it before they get up and walk away, the metaphor being before actual violence breaks out. And with Biden, there doesn't seem to be any real concern about that. There doesn't even seem to be any real control over that. It has now come out, I think the Washington Post printed this afternoon, or maybe it was yesterday, that the U.S. Warned Ukraine against blowing up the Nord Stream. And they just said, go get your fucking shine box. They did it anyway. So with Biden, there doesn't seem to be the will or the competency to keep a lid on these things. And we're only getting closer and closer to a hot World War III. I have a feeling when the history is written, this will be described as World War III in 100 years anyway, if it stays as it is. Because we're treating Ukraine as a NATO country now. We're just not calling them a NATO country because then we'll have no choice but to escalate immediately and drastically. But we're giving them weapons. I mean, we're giving them what they need to fight the war. We're treating them as an ally. So what the hell is the difference? So the point that, well, this could have happened under Trump, I'm sorry. That I award that 0 points.
Well, that's something else. Are you
happy, Courtney? Courtney in the audience. Are you happy? Are you happy? Have I satisfied you?
She sent me a book. I appreciate it. And Pasta really knows his shit. Like when the Ukraine war first broke out, I did some research on the Maidan coup, and I did some research on the Donbass. But honestly, given that we're in this space, not as much as I could or should. And I definitely felt that watching this interview. Like, yo, man, Pasta's on his shit. He fucking knows. He knows this inside and out, backward and forward. And I've read enough into it that I know he's not pulling this out of his ass. Like, those are legitimate points that he's making. It's just, again, I don't know anybody who is informed enough on it or ballsy enough to say this to Cornel West, like, straight out.
Empire can lead the world toward war. It could have been with North Korea. I mean, there's all kinds of different possibilities in that regard. So that if we use solely the possibility of nuclear holocaust, nuclear exchange, the head of any empire, when it comes to the most powerful empire in the history of the world, the United States, it could be Trump or Biden in that regard. No, I think part of the difference here is the difference between a catastrophe and a disaster is that I think you would have to acknowledge that when it comes to all
right, we'll let him finish in a second. I don't love this semantical nitpicking over him going now into parsing the difference between a catastrophe and a disaster. And, to Pasta's point, this does sound like water carrying for the Democrats. If you're running as a third party, your point has to be very simple, which is that both options are unacceptable. Unacceptable. Now, he eventually does get there, to his credit. But he takes the long way there. The way Jill Stein put it in 2016 was very, very good. She said, look, if I wake up November 9th and Trump has won, I'm going to be pretty frightened. But she said, if I wake up November 9th and the Democrats win, I'm also going to be very frightened. Like, that's how you say it. These two parties are both beyond the pale. And you have to keep the messaging there. When you start saying, well, a disaster is not as bad as a catastrophe, or catastrophe is not as bad as a disaster, and here's what I mean by that, that really muddies things a bit. So, I thought this was too long and too meandering an answer, but he does eventually get to his point. Should I play it, or do you have anything to add?
I feel like this kind of ties together in a way with the Cop City thing. I mean, talking about the two parties. You know what I'm really worried about, and I kind of intimated it a little bit when we were interviewing Jimmy, and I was asking him if he's afraid they're going to shut us all down as they become increasingly under threat from the population. The fear for me, and if we do get to talk to Dr. West, I think I'll bring this up, is it feels like the more restive the population gets, the less the entire system feels a need to pretend it is other than what it is. You see, back during the Stonewall riots, I feel like they still felt like they had to pretend that this was a democracy. They had to pretend that there was freedom. And I feel like increasingly they're willing to throw the mask off and just govern through open censorship, suppression, and hostility. So that's really at the core of this question to me. Like, when you're supporting Democrats, you're just supporting another flavor of fascism. You really are. And in some ways, it's a more insidious form of fascism because they're for good things and against bad things, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, when it comes to fascism, if you look at the Umberto Eco, 14 points of fascism, Donald Trump satisfies a lot of them. But Joe Biden satisfies quite a lot of them, too.
Right.
You may say Trump satisfies more, but when you look at the really just insidious relationship now between the government and major financial and corporate centers to enforce the will of the government, mainly in terms of censorship, but all kinds of other incentivizing, right? That could really be described equally well as a fascistic dynamic.
Of course it is.
And so I think, like, when we had Jimmy on the show on Thursday, he said, you shouldn't call Trump a fascist. And then he put the caveat in there, which I thought was smart. He says, unless you're going to call Biden a fascist also. Like, I don't actually have a problem with saying both of them are fascist. Like, I think that's just telling the truth.
Sure.
Right. But I don't think you should be selective, because when Cornel West says, as he said on Bill Maher, and he even put that clip, I believe, in his announcement campaign video, well, you have neo-fascism on the one hand and then milquetoast neoliberalism on the other hand. Well, that makes the Democrats sound better, because if you take a poll of 1,000 people and say, which would you rather live under, a sort of militant neo-fascism or a milquetoast neoliberalism, they're going to pick milquetoast. I mean, it says right in there, milquetoast.
Right.
Milquetoast is fairly benign, right?
It's becoming quite a bit more muscular.
Right.
That's it.
Exactly. This is not benign. We're not in a benign situation here.
This is not your grandfather's shit livery.
Right. Exactly. All right, here we go.
Gestures toward rights and liberties, gestures toward trade union activities, gestures toward trying to deal with voting rights and trying to deal with gerrymandered voting patterns. You see, that the disastrous Democratic Party, rhetorically, symbolically, but at times even concretely, are able to move in the direction toward those black voters and toward those trade unionists and so forth than was Trump.
All right. So what he's saying there is that Trump's hostile gestures on immigration, on labor, on those issues that he's talking about, make him more of a fascist. And look, to Cornel's point, gestures are part of what makes fascists fascists. Like, gestures are not insignificant. Part of what makes a fascist is their sort of demagogic tone towards outgroups or minority groups, or even in the 14 points, I won't call them sexual deviants because I don't think that's a nice way to put it. I don't think it's the right way to put it. But they enforce, sexual or even gender norms, right? In a way that, yes, Trump does more aggressively. So those gestures do account for something, but they don't account for everything.
Well,
and
but
when you weigh that
number...
against the actions that we're talking about here, the actions of the alliance of corporate and state power, that, as Pasta put in his question, that right now is the fascist threat. I brought that up in our conversation with Jordan also. The fascist threat right now is security interests merging with corporate interests, merging with state interests. That's the real fascism now. The gestures count for something, granted, but that's secondary now. It has to be in any serious analysis of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, the only thing that gives me hope is point number 12 in the 14 points is spectacular fashion sense, and neither one of them has that.
Exactly. Yeah, Biden puts it well. Demagoguery matters less than World War III. I agree. That's exactly my point. It's not that it counts for nothing, but you can't really put those side by side in the way that he's trying to here. All right, here we go.
What I mean by, the problem is that both of these parties have such a vicious dimension of them that they do look so similar. They look similar. Take to the brothers right now in Jenkins and Park in Mississippi. The party looks similar. Looks similar on the West Bank. In the Middle East, parties look similar.
Have to go.
If you're arguing that Trump is better than Biden across the board, given his attempts to reshape government, viciously attack.
But that's not what he's arguing. He's not arguing Trump is better than Biden across the board. He's saying, based on the prioritization of the existential issue of our time, I would pull the lever for Trump before Biden because Trump is better on that issue.
Right.
That's all he's saying. He's not making an across-the-board evaluation.
World War III is his red line.
Right. That's the red line. That's the issue that trumps everything, as it should be. I agree with Pasta, by the way. He has the balls to say it. I'll have the balls to say it. Gun to my head, I'd probably vote for Trump, too, because of this issue alone. It's an existential issue. Okay? So there you go, Pasta. Solidarity.
As things stand, I'll be voting for Dr. West, or I'll be writing in Dave Chappelle.
Yeah. I thought it was, if he can go out on a limb, so can we. Solidarity with Pasta. We are the garlic bread and escarole on the side.
we're the gabagools, so to speak.
The gabagool over here.
Immigrants, viciously attack black folk, viciously attack progressives like yourself and myself as leftists, always Marxists and communists and so forth. Then that's a different kind of argument. I mean, I think the important thing is to build an alternative to both.
Okay, so there you go. So again, he lands on build the alternative to both. In the future, cut that middle part. Cut all that shit. Because the point is, when you're running as a third party, you have to condemn both parties. You have to make both parties out of bounds. Once you start equivocating and tell the people, well, the Democrats are better, well, that gives people an excuse to just vote for the Democrat, right? And same thing on the right. If you're a libertarian, you don't talk up the Republicans over the Democrats, right? Because that gives your people an excuse that, yeah, all right, whatever, I'll vote red. You don't want that. You're trying to build alternative power. And so you have to be very, very clear on that.
And by the way, we're going to do this segment, but I have noticed a lot of people in our feeds and in the comments have been wondering about what exactly our position is on Cornel West and why, and the Green Party. So we will get into that at the end of this segment.
Sure. I mean, I think we're kind of getting a little bit into it as we go, but we'll devote some time to it at the end. All right. So part two. This is when Pasta brings up Dr. Fauci. So for the sake of not playing too much of their video, Pasta showed a clip of Cornel West praising Fauci. I believe that was in fall of 2020, before the presidential election. So it must have been September or October. And then he asked them to explain if his position on Fauci has changed since then, or does he regret having praised him at the time? That's the sort of setup. Here's the answer. Oops, I'm sorry.
Do you regret these comments, and do you regret kind of uplifting Dr. Fauci in this situation, because people have said to me, they're like, you should ask Dr. West. It seems like there's more than one crack pipe going around when he could say these things about Dr. Fauci when he's had a history tied to the pharmaceutical.
Ballsy, bringing up that crack pipeline, throwing it back at him. Pasta, bringing the arrabbiata sauce there,
Where's he from? Is he from New York?
He's from Long Island.
Yeah, he's got the accent.
Yeah, he told us that when we were on his show. He said he's a Long Island guy. Yeah, definitely.
Companies tied to gain of function, tied to Bill Gates.
Let me just play this again without our wisecrackery.
Situation, because people have said to me, they're like, you should ask Dr. West. It seems like there's more than one crack pipe going around when he could say these things about Dr. Fauci when he's had a history tied to the pharmaceutical companies, tied to gain of function, tied to Bill Gates and the Bill Gates Foundation. The financial gains of this towards the millionaire class, the billionaire class that came to the COVID-19 is off the charts. So do you want to make a comment about this and try to give us a little insight to what you were thinking and why you said these things?
Yeah, no, I appreciate you raising this question, though, brother, because, what I said was not based on any extensive investigation. I always know that the pharmaceutical companies have a disproportionate role in shaping the public policy. That's what corporate power and what corporate wealth does, be it in one sphere as opposed to another. But I was basing it in part on what I was perceiving in what Brother Fauci was putting forward, given that knowledge of the pharmaceutical industry having that kind of influence. And it was in real time that we were in such crisis. We had to do something, and we needed to have someone who was trying to put forward a view or a set of policies that could push back the disease on the one hand and also try to envision an overcoming of it down the road on the other. I agree with you. I do not believe in censorship. I do not believe in suppressing dissenting voices. That includes dissenting doctors, that includes dissenting schools of medicine and what have you. In that particular moment, I probably should have been much, much, much more critical. So I would acknowledge that. There's no doubt about it.
All right. Now, Pasta goes on to show him the RFK book and said, well, everything that's in this book I knew before I read it. And just so you know, folks, I did find a version of that book from Barnes & Noble for $9.99, an ebook. So I will be reading it. I know I said I would read it sooner. It was $14.99 on Amazon. I'm sorry, you have your religious beliefs. I have mine. I cannot pay a Kennedy more than $10 for an ebook. I can't do it. Yeah, well, there you have it. Guilty as charged. I could not do it. I almost did it. I was like, all right, let me do it. I'm like, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't. I won't. I looked for it at the library, too. My local library has 2 copies of it, but they're rented out. They've been out forever. The people never brought them back. They probably died of COVID. That's why they couldn't return them. Joking. Can all take a joke here, right? All right. There go the RFK stands out the door, never coming back. Our subs just dropped by 1,000, right? Because I made that joke. Kidding, folks. Kidding. Have a sense of humor, okay? But no, I will read it. But anyway, the point of that was, look, on that answer, I thought Cornel gave a fair answer. I honestly did. Because part of the problem in 2020 was that there was no authority to counter anything that Fauci was saying or to take him down a notch, right? I mean, Pasta was doing it, but it's not reasonable to expect everybody to listen to the Convo couch or podcasters and things like that. The person who created this vacuum of authority, this vacuum of information, was actually Donald Trump. And this is the thing that DeSantis is going after Trump for. And we'll see how successful it is. So far, it doesn't seem to be making a dent, but come debate time, maybe it will. DeSantis is basically saying, look, one of the reasons why Fauci looked so good for so long to so many people is because Trump just passed the ball to him and said, here, I don't want to deal with this thing. Here, you do it. And there was no messaging out of the White House. There was no messaging from the government except for what Fauci was saying. Well, and so I don't think it's reasonable, and don't confuse what I'm saying. I think it was an excellent question. I think it's very fair to ask, hey, knowing what we know now, do you regret having, blown all that smoke up his ass? Totally fair question on Pasa's part. But I don't think it is entirely fair to expect that, an academic like Cornel West, who was not interested in running for office at the time, I don't think it's fair to hold those stances against him at the time, especially when he just admits to you right now, I think in retrospect, I should have been more skeptical. I thought that was a fair answer on his part. I really do.
Not only that, remember, we have a media that doesn't do its job. Quite the opposite. We have a media that functions as propagandists. This was actually something I mentioned when we were talking to Jordan, because he was talking about how stations like ours didn't cover a union action in Albany that he had said the media wasn't covering. And I said, well, if the media wasn't covering it, how would we have known about it? With Dr. Fauci, I mean, the media was not telling you anything. So unless you are aware of places to find that information, like people who are really on this subject, how would you know? You know, you really have to find ways to go around the media. So really, I don't blame him, and I don't blame anyone at that time who thought that. How would you know? How would you know? Like, I personally knew everything they were saying about Andrew Cuomo was bullshit because I live here. If I lived in Michigan, would I have known that? Would I have been as aware that the media narrative about him was false? Would I have been as aware of how much they were hyping up Giuliani and how hated he was in New York City? I wouldn't have known. I live here, so I knew the disconnect between the way the media covered Giuliani and how people felt about him in New York City. So how can you really hold him to account? If the media is not doing its job and informing the public, how would you know?
I mean, there was the Rand Paul exchange with the gain of function. That was really the extent to which he was ever challenged, and even that was pretty far into
much later. I'm talking about at the time that he made those statements.
Right.
I mean, come on, man. Unless you were on this beat, like Pasta clearly is, you wouldn't know any of this shit, man. I didn't know Fauci from a fucking hole in the ground before this happened.
Right, and there was a complete lack of information from any source that seemed authoritative at the time. And again, you can go back in retrospect and say, well, you should have read this, should have read that. I mean, those were very dire circumstances. And like I said, I thought his answer there was fair. And I saw Courtney post a chat that said, well, he called Fauci a humanitarian down the road. I think his follow-up question was, you don't think Fauci has any concern for well-being? He still obviously doesn't know that much about the topic. He posed that as a question to Pasta, and then Pasta held up the book. So he said, I'll read the book, and look, we'll go from there.
Right.
All right.
Right.
We'll go from there. One of the things that Cornel West has done is he has made himself available to these shows. Bernie never did that. Bernie never went on a fucking Convo couch, right? Bernie never went on to RBN. Well, RBN didn't exist, but he didn't at the time. But he didn't go on independent. He went on the Kyle and Crystal show under the condition that Kyle not be there. So he's making himself available and accountable
Crystal,
to these spaces.
I have watched this show. He is clearly a fucking moron.
Yeah, right. You're making a big mistake here.
You're making a big mistake. I'm telling you, you're going to wind up sleeping on my couch.
Exactly. So that was that answer. We'll see if there's a follow-up interview. I imagine there probably will be. I think he seems to be a man of his word. I think he'll come back if he says he will. And we'll see. And I'll have to read the book, honestly. I'm ordering it. Like I said, I found the deal on it. So let's go with the last one. Okay, so this is an interesting one because this is something that Russell said he wanted to ask him if we ever had the honor of interviewing.
I mean, it's not exactly
Cornel West. Well, not exactly, but it's along those lines.
It's in the neighborhood.
It's in the neighborhood, right? All right, so here we go.
I was just going to ask you, when I talk to a lot of conservatives and I talk to a lot of people on the populist right, they don't say they're transphobic. The area that they are most concerned is that sexuality and gender is taught in schools. I mean, is it really, when you're going to approach a person who's a conservative or a populist right, they're going to say that. How are you going to handle that? Because I never thought that we should ever have sexuality taught in schools. So when it comes to transphobia, do they not have a point, at least a conversation to listen to when they're saying we just don't want our precious children being indoctrinated and programmed?
I mean, the thing is, you never, ever want any parent or any person to be indoctrinated and programmed by a teacher. I don't care if it's American history. I don't care if it's about sexuality. A teacher is not there to indoctrinate. That I think that, in fact, it's very important that people begin with a notion of acknowledging there's a variety of different peoples in the world, and they all should be respected with dignity. But that's almost about all you need to say. I don't think you need a whole lot more, because once you get into that, then all of a sudden you start taking positions on a whole host of issues that the teacher has very little expertise on, and could easily misconstrue material or mislead students. So that in that sense, I'm not big on teaching sexuality. I'm big on teaching dignity of a variety of different persons, and there have always been, and there will always be, a lot of different persons of different sexuality, different sexual fluidity. But that doesn't need to be the fundamental subject matter in a classroom. And there, I do resonate with some of the conservative fellow citizens, but we'd have to have a much longer discussion on that too. You can imagine.
Come back when Fiorella gets back, because she'd love to talk to you, and I'd love you guys to talk about what she experienced with Alex Saab and all that. Dr. West, thank you so much for coming on. If I don't catch up to you soon, I'll see you on the campaign trail.
Absolutely. God bless you and your family, man. You stay strong, though, Brother Pasta.
I will, Dr. Cornel West. Thank you for coming on. I'll speak to you soon.
All right. So, I thought that was a fairly good answer there as well. And, I chose to keep that last bit in because once again, just look at the difference between how a guy like Cornel West handles a tough interview and Marianne Williamson or even RFK.
That is an excellent point.
Yeah.
She would have been calling him a mansplainer 5 minutes in.
Right. Exactly. So anyway, I know this is a big issue for you. So what did you like? What did you think of that answer?
That's a promising answer. If we do interview him, I'll get more specific. I will ask about biological men and women's sports, and I will ask I will probably ask about inappropriate performances for children. And to be clear, that doesn't mean to me, look, if a drag queen wants to sit there in a ball gown and read Cinderella to kids, that's not my issue. If it's something that would not be acceptable if it were a heterosexual performer to do, slapping a rainbow flag on it doesn't suddenly make it appropriate. Now, those of you who are subscribers saw the video that I put together. This is not a phantasm of the right-wing mind. There are really performances going on in front of children that are pretty sick, in my opinion. Beyond that, of course, probably the biggest issue, medicalizing gender dysphoria. I don't believe there should be any kind of medication or surgery under the age of 18. Now, for me, we discussed this offline, so that's a good segue into. So what do we think about Cornel West? Because, a lot of people have a lot of very strong opinions about this and about the Green Party and so on. I've seen it. And we have a platform and people come and listen every week. We do owe it to people, I think, to explain our positions and to let them know what those positions are. I am tentatively for this candidacy for this reason. I don't believe you can enact any meaningful reform or change of the parties at this point. So that's a dead end. So at that point, if you are going to have any kind of an effort within the electoral system, it's going to have to be a third party effort. You're not talking about Cornel West winning. I don't think any reasonable person expects that. You're talking about getting over 5% so you can get matching funds and threaten the system. Or barring that, do well enough that just like what the squad should have done, you don't need a lot of people to hold Congress hostage. You just need enough for them not to be able to pass legislation. Same thing with a third party. You don't need to get 51% to be a mortal threat to the two-party system and its agenda. You just need to be enough to be able to swing elections. So that, for me, is what it's about. And that's why I'm not going to get down into the weeds of what somebody said one time about a thing in an interview that you don't like. Whatever, man. whatever. If you look at what he had to say in that interview, it seems like a pretty reasonable, open-minded person to me. Now, some people talk about problems with the Green Party, which honestly, I've never bothered to look into because it's always struck me as the fights are so big because the stakes are so small thing. Like, who cares? I don't give a shit what those fucking crazy bastards say amongst themselves. I don't care. Now I care because you're talking about making an investment in it. Now I'll look into it more. But I do feel like what the Green Party was in the past is not necessarily an indication of what it will be when you have probably more people coming in as part of the West campaign that belong to the Green Party total now by many multiples. That's going to, it'll be a completely different party. That having been said, it is worth knowing if there are institutional problems like that. And I will take it. People are setting off fireworks.
Yeah, that's what it is. I saw somebody in the chat wondering what the hell that was. They thought the orcas were here because the one sounded like a, it sounded like that.
Land shark.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'll look into it because you do want to know if there are going to be these kind of institutional obstacles left over from people who I'm sure are not going to want to let go of their power, their institutional power within the Green Party. And again, the fights are so big because the stakes are so small. So those people, even though it's obviously kind of suicidal for the party, I'm sure there are, these functionaries within the Green Party who are not going to like the idea of this big presence bringing in a bunch of people and overwhelming their power within this party, right? I'm sure that exists and it's worth looking into. It's just not, and people who bring it up, thank you. That is something we should be aware of. It doesn't mean it's not an effort worth getting invested in. That means it's something to be aware that has to be overcome. Now, in terms of Cornel West, he seems like a decent, open-minded person to me, and I haven't heard him say anything that's a deal breaker for me. In all honesty, if we do get to ask him those questions, for me, I could not support somebody who is not against medicalizing gender dysphoria in children and teenagers. Now, strategically, that's not really rational because I'm just talking about burning down the system. Nobody's talking about this guy becoming president. No matter what he believes, he's not actually going to be able to enact those beliefs into legislation or law. But for me, just like if you feel I wouldn't be able to get my heart into a campaign where the guy supports the war in Ukraine. I wouldn't be able to get my heart into a campaign where the guy supports the apartheid state of Israel in its current form. So I would not personally feel comfortable with somebody who had that position. Like, I just could not. I'm very honest. Like, I need to be able to believe in what I'm doing and what I'm saying, particularly when you're talking about something like a campaign where you're talking about phone banking or door knocking. And I have a platform here. So you're talking about telling people, yeah, get behind this. I have to believe in it in my heart. I have to really believe in it. And yes, there is an element of this for me that is just cold strategic calculation. At the same time, are there no positions he could take that would make me like, I just can't in all good conscience tell people to vote for this? Yes, there are. And so far, Pasta did kind of breach that territory. And I liked what he had to say. And let me just make one thing clear, because I saw some of this in the chat. I think some people have interpreted the fact that I feel strongly about the women's sports subject or surgery and medical treatment for minors as being anti-trans in a way that they like. They want to support that. I'm not anti-trans. I'm not anti-anybody. I think everybody should have equal rights, equal protection under the law. Everyone should be treated with respect and with dignity. That's why when we did our big episode on this, we invited on Buck Angel a trans person to talk about it and also to make the point, this is not all trans people who support this. I don't even personally think it's most. I think it's hard to figure that out. to find out. I don't think anybody's really doing that kind of research, partly because they don't want the answer. That's not about being against trans people. That's about being against an agenda that is being pushed, I think, by venture capital, academia, and groups that make their money off creating social conflict. I don't believe that's an organic movement that is organically arising, either in the trans community, the gay community, the community in general. I think it's something that's being ginned up and imposed by people with their own agenda. So, some people saw the Coney Island thing and saw gay people. I don't know what you thought this channel was, man. It's not that. It's not about being against people. It's about being for everybody.
Well, I'll tell you, Cornel West could cut my dick off and I'd still vote for him. That's what I call that. That's how much of a stan I am. But, yeah. No, I mean, look, to what you said. I mean, look, yes. To me, the red line is Ukraine. It's disband NATO. He is on the right side of that issue. And, for me, that issue, as I attempted, stupidly, I suppose, to communicate to Jordan Sheridan, that issue is a proxy for a larger struggle between capitalism and its first real formidable ideological competitor in decades. And so, if you're talking about supporting a candidate like a Cornel West or, any third-party candidate, if you're more of the, libertarian bent, whatever, all are welcome here. It's a viewpoint diverse audience, and we're very, very happy about that. Even if it's RFK, like if RFK were running as an independent and you wanted to support him and you can make the case, fine. For me, the Israel-Palestine issue is an issue where I would just very easily point to Cornel West. Game over, right? But when you talk about a candidate like Cornel West or a candidate around whom you're trying to not simply build a movement in the short term, but really establish the ideological framework for whatever movement you're going to try to build off of this particular candidacy, you have to have certain standards for, okay, what are the values of the movement that we're trying to build? And to me, if you're either indifferent on Russia-Ukraine or if you're on the wrong side of Russia-Ukraine, that demonstrates a lack of seriousness about what movement you're trying to create and whether that will be at all worthwhile. So to me, he's already sort of passed my litmus test to the point where I would be shocked if I did not go into a voting booth on November 5th, 2024 and pull the lever for Cornel West. That is almost certain to happen in my case. He would have to really step in it to fuck that up at this point. Now, it's a different question. Should people invest in it, right? Should people put time in and money in? Should they donate? Should they phone bank? Should they volunteer? That's a question that we'll have to see, how things play out in the coming months. Because, as Nick pointed out to Marianne, working people don't have infinite time and resources, right? Just because we like Cornel West, just because I will almost certainly be voting for Cornel West, that doesn't mean I can advocate for any significant investment in his campaign at this point. I think it shows tremendous promise. I'm really excited that he's running. Like I said, I have great, great admiration and respect for him. And ultimately, the question comes down to, on November 5th, 2024, do you want to cause disruption and chaos and panic within the system, or do you not? Right? So if not Cornel West, who? Then maybe
Right.
you have an answer for that, and that's fine. If your answer is someone else, that's cool. If you don't think electoral politics is worth engaging in at all because you think it's totally hopeless and you want to put your resources somewhere else, that's cool too. But to me, the short-term goal as it pertains to this 2024 race is to make Democrats panic. You have to make them panic because right now they're not panicking. Look at the unions lined up. We just did a segment earlier. 17 labor unions, right? The backbone of the movement. What do we say? 2021, there was just all this noise about, oh, we have the labor movement's back, baby. It's back. Look at all these labor actions. 17 of them, just boom, boom, boom. Biden, 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 Biden. The Democrats are not panicking now. The Democrats are sitting pretty, doing fuck all for working people, and counting on the fact that the Republicans will probably make enough fuck ups of their own to put them back in power. That's what they're doing. And if you're satisfied with that dynamic, then by all means, pick apart what Cornel West said about Dr. Fauci 3 years ago. All right. But if you're more interested in making Democrats panic and causing disruption and chaos within the system, then I think at this point, going out and voting for Cornel West in November of next year is a pretty good way to go about doing that. And that's why I'm almost certain to do that.
We are going to make T-shirts with Cornel's face with the Heath Ledger makeup saying, burn down Gotham, vote Cornel.
Right, exactly. That's it. That's really it.
Please clap.